They introduced me as nothing more than his sister. The room laughed politely. Glasses clinked, and Nathan basked in the spotlight while my name was reduced to a footnote. I smiled, but inside, something broke. For years, I had carried the weight, the silence, the sacrifices no one cared to ask about, and in that moment, I realized the wound wasn't new. It had been carved into me long ago. My name is Ginevra. The chandeliers glowed with a golden shimmer, catching the tilt of every raised glass. A jazz trio played softly near the bar, their notes weaving through bursts of laughter and the clink of champagne. The Hollingsworth name carried well in that Texas officers' club, and tonight, every detail had been staged to shine on Nathan. He stood tall in the center, cheeks flushed with praise, while my parents orbited around him like planets pulled into his gravity. I sat at a smaller table near the edge of the room, my place set neatly but overlooked. Waiters passed with trays of shrimp cocktails and sparkling wine, barely glancing my way. Strangers approached me only to ask questions that slid across the surface. "Did you help Nathan with his speech?" "You must be so proud." Their smiles carried polite interest, nothing more. I returned the expressions they expected, a faint curve of the lips, but inside, I felt the quiet throb of distance. My father's voice boomed above the chatter, drawing a retired colonel and his wife closer to his circle. He laid a hand on Nathan's shoulder, chest swelling with pride, then casually motioned toward me. "This is Ginevra, Nathan's sister. She handles paperwork at a base somewhere." The colonel chuckled. The wife gave me a pitying nod, and the room moved on as if nothing had been said. Laughter filled the air again. Champagne rose in unison, and Nathan soaked it in effortlessly. I forced a smile, but a dull ache bloomed beneath it, and with it came the whisper of memories, years of being pushed to the margins while my brother's spotlight grew brighter. That ache reminded me this wound hadn't started tonight. It had always been there, waiting. The applause that night carried me backward, tugging me into memories I'd tried to bury. I could still see myself at 18, clutching the acceptance letter from the Air Force Academy. My parents glanced at it, muttered a quick, "That's nice," then went back to talking about dinner plans. 2 weeks later, Nathan signed his enlistment papers, and the house erupted into a parade of congratulations. They threw him a party in the backyard with balloons and barbecue, neighbors invited, and in the driveway sat a brand-new black SUV with a ribbon on the hood. His first step toward greatness deserved champagne toasts. My first step, apparently, was just expected. The pattern never broke. Years later, when I called home in desperation, short on money for a new apartment near base, my mother sighed and told me funds were tight. "We have to keep some aside for Nathan. You're the strong one, you'll figure it out." I hung up, took a weekend job hauling boxes at a warehouse, and never mentioned it again. Their silence became my burden, my strength treated as proof I needed nothing. That night at the club, the laughter around Nathan replayed those years in sharp clarity. I realized the role had been carved early. I was the reliable one, invisible unless needed. He was the spark, the one they bragged about. That label clung to us both like a second skin, mine heavy with expectation, his polished with praise. Behind their assumptions was another life they couldn't imagine. I wasn't filing papers. I was carrying a different kind of weight. I had jumped into hostile zones, led teams in silence, and once stood in a desert compound with the barrel of my rifle trained on a man holding American hostages. The operation never made headlines, but it lived in the scars I kept hidden. None of it could be spoken at family dinners. Classified meant silence, and silence left room for them to invent their own small version of me. The quieter I became, the more ordinary I looked in their eyes. Then, as I sat through Nathan's celebration, my phone buzzed, a message from an old teammate. "General Kellen's there tonight. He knows your name." My pulse spiked. Kellen wasn't a man you impressed easily. His recognition meant he'd heard stories not printed anywhere. If anyone in that room could pierce the lie my family lived by, it would be him. Yet the thought unsettled me. Part of me longed for the truth to surface. Another part wondered if I was ready to let it. The party swelled as the night wore on. Every toast raised higher, every laugh louder. Nathan stood in the center of it all, basking in the adoration. My mother's voice carried over the music as she launched into another anecdote, this one about how Nathan once carried the family dog to the vet in the pouring rain. The crowd erupted with applause as though he'd dragged a wounded soldier from a battlefield. My father nodded proudly, clinking his glass in agreement. I sat in silence, keeping my expression neutral, though each word pressed harder against the tightness in my chest. Then one of the guests turned toward me, his smile tinged with amusement. "You must be so proud to have a brother like him." "Huh?" The way he said it wasn't a question, but a dismissal, an assumption that my role in the story was only to applaud from the sidelines. Nathan caught my eye across the table and let a slow grin spread over his face. "She doesn't have anything to brag about," he said lightly. "Paperwork and computers, that's all." A ripple of laughter followed, the kind that stung more because it was casual, unthinking. They weren't laughing at a joke, they were laughing at me. I pressed my lips together, forcing my hands to stay folded neatly in my lap. I gave them nothing, not a correction, not a protest, but inside, the decision was already forming. I wouldn't let this moment define me. I was done being the backdrop to Nathan's spotlight. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the music faltered into silence. Conversations dimmed as General Kellen stepped inside, his presence pulling the room into a hush. Nathan lit up instantly, rushing forward like a child eager to present his best report card. He ushered the general straight to my parents, his voice brimming with pride. "This is my family, sir," he said, launching into stories of his training and small accomplishments. My father laughed heartily, pumping the general's hand, boasting as though Nathan's triumphs were a legacy written in our bloodline. I stayed in my chair, invisible as ever, until my mother leaned down, her lips brushing close to my ear. Her smile never wavered for the crowd, but her words cut sharp as glass. "Don't you dare draw attention! Don't ruin this for your brother!" Her warning wasn't new, but something in me shifted. I rose quietly, pushing my chair back, and walked toward the hall. Not to cry, not to vanish, but to prepare for what I knew would change everything. I slipped out of the ballroom, the sound of laughter muffled as the heavy door closed behind me. The quiet hallway carried me to my hotel room, where the garment bag had hung untouched for years. Waiting, my hand steadied on the zipper before I pulled it down. The hiss of metal teeth sliding apart cut through the silence like a warning bell. Inside lay the navy blue service dress uniform, crisp and heavy with meaning. I laid it out carefully, fastening each ribbon, each insignia with deliberate hands. Every piece I pinned down was a story no one at that party had ever cared to hear. Sleepless nights in desert winds. Orders followed without hesitation. Choices that weighed lives. The fabric carried it all. And when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the forgotten sister. I saw the soldier I had become, the woman who had survived enough silence to let the truth speak for itself. When I re-entered the ballroom, heads turned instantly. The buzz of chatter dulled, and eyes tracked me with startled confusion. My mother rushed forward, smile frozen for the crowd, but her words sharp as a blade. "Take that off right now! You're making a spectacle of yourself!" I stood still, unblinking. Nathan's laughter broke the moment. He pointed at me, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "What is this, Halloween? Did you raid a costume shop?" A ripple of chuckles followed, careless and cruel. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence held more weight than their noise, and for the first time, some of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their laughter still echoed when General Kellen's voice cut off mid-sentence. He turned, his gaze locking on me, scanning the ribbons, then pausing at the rare insignia over my heart. Recognition sharpened his expression. Without hesitation, he stepped through the crowd, ignoring Nathan's attempts to draw him back, ignoring my father's eager handshake. He stopped directly in front of me, squared his shoulders, and gave a crisp salute. "Commander Hollingsworth," he said, his tone steady, reverent. It's an honor. The room froze. Glasses hung mid-air. The music kept playing, but no one heard it. Nathan's smirk collapsed, leaving his face slack with disbelief. My mother's lips parted soundlessly, my father's jaw clenched in shock. Whispers rose like a tide. A few veterans among the guests leaned forward, murmuring as they recognized the emblem that so few ever earned. My name, spoken with authority by the general himself, rolled across the room and shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. I didn't move. I didn't explain. The uniform had spoken, and the silence that followed was no longer mine to carry. The general's salute still hung in the air, a weight that pressed on every corner of the ballroom. Then he lowered his hand and reached for mine, his grip firm, steady, the kind of handshake that carried respect instead of obligation. "I've heard your name more than once," he said, voice pitched low enough for me, but clear enough that the surrounding silence caught every word. "Your work in recent operations hasn't gone unnoticed." My nod was small, measured, but the acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. A murmur rose from the back of the room, cautious at first, then spreading as recognition took hold. A pair of veterans near the bar leaned toward each other, whispering, eyes flicking to the insignia over my heart. Others followed, tracing the rows of ribbons, piecing together a truth that had never needed a stage or applause to exist. The polite smiles that had once skimmed over me shifted into something sharper. Curiosity, then respect, then awe. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father's hand tremble as he lifted his glass, as if muscle memory alone guided the gesture. His throat worked, but no words came. My mother sat rigid in her chair, chin tucked low, her fingers strangling the fabric of her napkin. And Nathan, his skin blanched, his smirk broken, his lips forming a half-syllable that died before it could reach the air. How is this?" I gave him nothing. No explanation, no correction, no defense. I stood in stillness, the weight of the uniform grounding me in a way their approval never had. The general's presence did the rest. His respect cut deeper than any insult they'd ever thrown, and he had delivered it in front of the only audience that had ever mattered to them. The room no longer belonged to Nathan. It no longer belonged to my parents' curated version of pride. Without raising my voice, without demanding a thing, the truth had filled the silence. I inclined my head once more to General Kellen, letting the gesture speak for me. The air felt different now, charged, irreversible. In their eyes, I was no longer background, no longer invisible. They understood, whether they wanted to or not. I had never been just Nathan's sister. Back at the base, the stillness of my quarters wrapped around me like armor. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and sank into the silence I had longed for all evening. It lasted less than 5 minutes. My phone buzzed, then again, the vibrations rattling across the desk like an unwelcome drumbeat. The first message lit up the screen. "You humiliated this family. How could you?" My father's voice practically echoed through the words, indignant and wounded. The tone I had heard my entire life whenever their carefully polished image cracked. I let the message sit, unread a second longer than necessary, before another arrived. "Why didn't you tell us?" My mother wrote. "We would have been proud. We are proud. Please don't twist this into something ugly." A third message landed seconds later, softer, pleading. "You should have trusted us. You should have let us celebrate you too." They came in waves, anger first, then confusion, then bargaining. By the time midnight pressed against the windows, their words had shifted into apology, regret, and fragile attempts at affection. "We just didn't know. Forgive us. We're so proud of you. Come home, let's talk. Don't shut us out." I read every line, but none of it touched me. It was like standing outside in a storm with an umbrella that had finally held. The rain fell, but I remained dry. I set the phone face down on the desk, its glow bleeding weakly against the wood, and closed my eyes. For once, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself, to bridge the gap. Their panic was theirs to carry. Days later, Nathan showed up in person. He waited for me near the motor pool, his posture stiff, face drawn in frustration more than shame. When I walked past, he hurried to catch up. "You have to help me," he blurted. "You know General Kellen. You can put in a word. He likes you. He respects you. One recommendation, and I could get the transfer I want." I stopped and turned, the arrogance in his voice, the assumption that my accomplishments existed as a ladder for him to climb, drained away whatever pity might have lingered. He looked at me expectantly, as though I owed him the very thing he had mocked me for my entire life. "No," I said simply. His eyes widened, as if the word itself was foreign. He stammered, "But you don't understand. This could change everything for me." "I understand perfectly." My voice was steady, not cruel, just final. "You've had every door opened for you, every mistake forgiven, every spotlight handed over, but not this. You're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet. He stared at me, jaw tight, chest rising and falling, as though the weight of my refusal pressed down harder than he expected. For a second, I thought he might argue, but the words never came. He turned away, shoulders stiff, the echo of his footsteps fading against the concrete. I stood where I was, letting the quiet settle again. There was no satisfaction in it, no triumph, just a release, like unclenching a fist that had been tight for too many years. When I returned to my quarters that evening, my phone blinked with more messages, apologies stacked on top of pleas. I powered it off, slid it into a drawer, and left it there. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to hear their voices to decide who I was. The cycle was broken. I no longer lived on the edge of their approval, waiting to be invited in. Their pride, their shame, their regret. It all belonged to them now, not to me. I had finally stepped outside of the loop that had bound me for decades. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. The rain in Oregon has a rhythm of its own. Steady, soft, never hurried. It taps lightly against the tin roof of my little house, waking me before the sun. I rise with it, barefoot across the cool floor, moving through the quiet like it's something sacred. No alarms, no uniforms, no one shouting orders, just the hiss of my kettle and the warmth of coffee in my palms. Outside, the air smells of salt and wet pine. My workshop waits, nestled behind the house, like a secret. Only I know how to enter properly. The door sticks a little on damp mornings, and the windows fog when I turn on the heater. But inside, the world makes sense. Boats come in broken, cracked beams, waterlogged ribs, blistered paint, and I mend them with patience, sanding, sealing, restoring. Some are fishing vessels, some small family boats left too long in the sun. None of them ask where I've been. None of them need me to explain who I am. They simply need fixing, and I do. The townspeople wave when they pass. They call me Ginevra, or sometimes just the boat lady. They bring me fresh clams or extra nails, and never once has anyone asked me what I did before I got here. No one asks about the medals. No one tries to fit me into a box I've already outgrown. And for the first time in my life, I'm not performing. I'm just living. I used to believe I needed a title to be seen, that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, was useful enough, maybe someone, anyone, would finally look up and say, "She matters." But that kind of visibility came with conditions. I had to stay small to keep their comfort intact. I had to swallow my pride so they could hold on to theirs. Not anymore. I don't need to be told I'm enough. I just am. Each morning, I sip my coffee on the dock while gulls circle overhead. Sometimes I think about my old life, the weight of secrecy, the ache of being dismissed, the exhaustion of proving myself over and over again. I let the memories pass, like clouds moving over the ocean. I no longer check my phone for messages that never come. I don't wait for apologies that never arrive. I stopped hoping for recognition, and in its absence, I found something better. Stillness, the kind of peace that doesn't demand an audience, the kind that lets you breathe in the smell of freshly cut cedar and rain, and know you're exactly where you're meant to be. I was never just someone's sister. I'm Ginevra Hollingsworth, and that is enough.